more on the mysterious death of Nolan Wells. We're joined by his parents, Christine and Elmore Wansley, as well as their attorney, Ben Crump. And before we get started, first off, I want to thank you for being here under these circumstances. I know how extremely tough it must be, and we can express how sorry we are for you and your family. And first question, how are you two holding up?
Taking it second by second.
Day by day.
Second by second and day by day, which we all can understand. And I just want to ask you, the friends that Nolan traveled to Horn Island with, they say that he stayed behind voluntarily. Why would he stay behind?
That we cannot answer. I can't fathom why he would.
I don't know why he would. We always taught him to, if you go with a group, you stay with a group. Mm-hmm. Even when he was in college, he would say, "Dad, well, we're gonna ride down to a party or something in another city." Now, so I was out telling him, "Look, if you go with 5, you come back with 5. Do not separate from your group." Because I always said, safety is in numbers. Mm-hmm. And he always said, "Yes, sir." So he knew to stay with his group. So why would he split from his group? I don't know.
So that would have been unusual for him to split from the group. Yeah. And you said he would always check in with you. Did he check in with you that day?
So that day, no, I don't. But of course, too, they were on the boat. And usually when he is out there, which it's not uncommon, he's, I think, since last year, he's been going there occasionally with his friends. And so it would always just be like, "Hey, Mom, I'm back," type of thing. But this time there was no call or text from him. It was from his friend.
And then too, really didn't worry a lot about it because it was his last weekend to have fun. Yeah. Because that Monday he had to report to school. We was preparing to take him back for camp to prepare for the season. So, we understand he wanted to have his last hurrah before he locked down and get ready for the season. Because, like I said, the entire summer he's training. He got more serious. He started to understand what I was trying to tell him about football, not just being fun, but as you get farther in it, it becomes a business. If you want to excel, and you have to understand, and you have to understand both at the same time.
And we know, Ben, that you said that you're going to do an independent investigation.
Yes.
And you say you have Nolan's cell phone and messages were deleted. How could you tell messages were deleted?
Well, his parents got the phone back, and that's something that's important, Michael, because they tracked this phone on Life 360.
So Life 360, but when I received the phone call from Warren, I immediately called my friend Tashima, and I said, "Hey, have you guys seen Nolan?" Because her 2 sons, Jalen and Javon, they grew up together. They played City League sports together. When they got into school, they played sports together. And so she was like, "Hey, okay," the boys were pulling up the location from Snapchat. So the Snapchat location looks completely different than the Life 360 location. So when I pulled up Life 360, it was different. It was showing everywhere the phone had been. I was like, "Well, it's showing that he's back on land. I'm not." He's like, "But no, he didn't come back with us."
Well, how were you able to get the phone?
So we tracked it, and my friend Tashima went and picked it up.
It wasn't like they said, "We got his phone." They tracked it, and that highlights all these contradictions, Michael. The fact that they said Nolan was talking to a young woman, and she said that he said, "I'm going back to get on the boat with the boys." The boys said that he said he was going to stay with her. And so that's an obvious contradiction. And then this video of this, you can hear an argument going where Nolan is saying, "Give me my freaking phone. What are you freaking doing?" And so then his phone ends up missing. I don't know any teenagers, Michael Strahan, who says, if you believe their story, I'm going to stay behind and I'm going to leave my phone. I mean, no young person leaves their cell phone. And so then there's so many things their parents were telling us about, even why didn't his body wash up with the tide on Sunday? Why would it come on Monday? It's not adding up. And that is the problem when you think about the history of Mississippi.
Yeah, so there's so many questions that need to be answered. And is there anything you'd like people to know about Nolan? What would you like them to know about your son?
No,
It's okay.
Nolan, take your time. Nolan was very loving. He was liked by all. It was not a friend that he couldn't make.
No, we'll be right back with more for the parents of Nolan Wells and attorney Ben Crump. We're back now on GMA with the parents of Nolan Wells, Christine and Elmore Wansley. And I want you to please continue to tell us what you want the world to know about your son.
So Nolan was just like this bright light, right? Walk into a room, his smile, his energy was just so infectious. Like it's almost like he drew you into him. And he was just one of those people, like he always wanted everyone to be included. He didn't want anyone to feel left out. I remember one of his teachers emailing us. I can't remember what grade he was in, but basically it was math class. They had a special needs student and she asked a question and Nolan got everyone to put their hands down because he wanted that student to answer. And so student answers the question and she was like, Christine, the classroom, Nolan went crazy and everyone else started going crazy, just celebrating that child, making them feel included. And that was the person he was. Like he loved everyone. And I always told Nolan, like, you have to be careful when you have such a big heart like that. I love that God blessed you with that, but you have to be careful with that because that it's not always returned, that type of love. But he was just genuinely a good person. Like I always say, all the best parts of me are with him.
And Dad, anything else you want to add?
It's just, he's gonna be really missed. I know a lot of his teammates, they all look to him as a leader. He's more like a silent leader. Not real big on words, more action, which is kind of like I was. I really wasn't real big on talking. I really wanted to show you and you follow me, and people follow him, and it's gravitated. He put in the work, he worked hard, and he knew he was focused on what he wanted, and he wanted to make life better for his family. He wanted to have his own family. He used to say, Dad, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to build this. I said, well, son, you got to take it one step at a time. Slow down, let's go, let's walk this thing out. Let's train, let's sign our deals, let's make these teams, make these camps, put the work in, and everything else will work out. Even his baby brother, their bond got even stronger because now I have a big brother that he's finna do something, so now I want to outdo that. So his focus and his confidence has got even better. So I was looking forward to both of them having outstanding years.
Seasons,
He seemed like he inspired in the home and he inspired
Absolutely.
outside of the home. And Attorney Crump, where do we go from here? What's next?
Well, the deleted messages that Christina was going to briefly touch on, we want to get the phone and figure that out.
Backtrack on that. When we finally got his phone, me and my sister went through the phone. We went in his Snapchat. He had 2 accounts, absolutely nothing. It wasn't even 24 hours, which is how long videos and pictures stay in Snapchat. And I was just like, that can't be. Like, I've seen Nolan whenever he snaps, like when he goes and he's having fun, like he does videos. Like there was absolutely nothing, no saved videos. And even my sister was like, yeah, that's suspicious,
Michael, we having an independent autopsy done at the behest of his family. Colin Kaepernick helped pay for the independent autopsy. We flew his body up from Mississippi to D.C. because they wanted an autopsy done by a person with no interaction with the Mississippi law enforcement, because there's an issue of trust here that is really important. And the fact that they keep trying to say, suggesting it was a drowning, but nobody out there reported him drowning. It's not adding up, Michael Strahan. It is not adding up.
And honestly, we are doing this because at the end of the day, I would hope any parent would fight for their kids to find out if anything happened, what did happen. So we just want honesty and transparency. We want a thorough investigation. We want that same respect that would be given to anybody else, and that's it. We just want answers.
Well, we really appreciate all of you being here. We hope you get the answers that you deserve to have, and we hope you get the closure that you need. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike.
The afternoon of July 4th was supposed to be simple. For most families across the Mississippi Gulf Coast, Independence Day meant boat rides, cookouts, fireworks, and long hours on the water. For 18-year-old Nolan Wells, it was meant to be a brief escape before returning to football workouts and preparing for the next chapter of his life. Instead, it became the final day anyone would see him alive. Before we begin, there's something important to remember. This story is built from publicly reported information, interviews, official statements, and comments made by Nolan's family and investigators. Some facts remain disputed, and several key questions have not yet been answered. Wherever uncertainty exists, we'll make that clear. But after hearing everything, one question remains impossible to ignore. If Nolan planned to leave the island with his friends, why didn't he? And before we go any further, tell us what you think. If you were on that boat, would you ever leave a friend behind on a remote island, believing someone else would bring them home? Let us know your answer in the comments, because by the end of this story, that simple question becomes far more complicated than it first appears. To understand why this case has captured national attention, you first have to understand who Nolan Wells was before his name appeared in headlines. To his family, he wasn't simply another teenager heading out with friends on a holiday weekend. He was the son who checked in with his parents, the young man who rarely ignored a phone call, the athlete whose schedule revolved around football practices, training sessions, and preparing for the future he believed was finally beginning to take shape. Family members have described him as energetic, social, and deeply connected to the people around him. He enjoyed documenting moments with friends, taking pictures, recording memories, saving the little moments that most teenagers never think twice about. Those habits would later become surprisingly important, because when investigators and Nolan's family eventually examined what should have been a normal day filled with photographs and videos, something seemed missing. Not one missing photo, not one missing conversation, almost an entire day. But that mystery wouldn't emerge until much later. At the beginning of the day, everything appeared ordinary. July 4th brought perfect weather for spending time on Horn Island. Located roughly 12 miles off Mississippi's coast, Horn Island isn't a place you simply drive to. There are no roads connecting it to the mainland, no neighborhoods, no permanent community. Getting there requires a boat. Once you're on the island, you're largely on your own until someone returns to pick you up. That's part of its appeal. Miles of beaches, natural beauty, isolation. For generations, locals have visited Horn Island to fish, swim, celebrate holidays, and enjoy the Gulf away from crowded beaches. On holidays, however, dozens of boats often gather offshore. Groups mingle. Music drifts across the water. Friends move from one gathering to another. It's busy enough that you rarely feel completely alone, yet isolated enough that if something goes wrong, help isn't always close. That reality would become critically important. Nolan traveled to Horn Island with 3 friends. Publicly available information identifies them as people he knew well enough to spend the holiday together. Nothing suggested the day would end differently than countless summer outings before it. No one reportedly expressed concern before leaving shore. No one imagined the trip would become the center of an investigation watched across the country. Hours passed. People swam, visited with other groups, enjoyed the holiday. Somewhere during that afternoon, Nolan met a young woman identified publicly by family members and later confirmed by her own mother. According to multiple public statements, the two spent some time talking together. That interaction would later become one of the most discussed moments of the entire investigation, because nearly every explanation for what happened afterward depends on one conversation. Only, different people describe that conversation differently. We'll return to that shortly. For now, imagine the setting. The afternoon sun beginning its slow descent. Boats preparing to leave before evening. People gathering belongings. Coolers being packed. Engines starting. The casual routines that signal a day on the water is ending. For Nolan's family, those ordinary moments would eventually become the dividing line between certainty and mystery, because sometime later, the boat carrying Nolan's friends departed. Without him, the return trip should have been uneventful. A short ride back across the water, unload the boat, head home, get ready for another week. Instead, according to public statements made later by investigators, Nolan's friends arrived back on the mainland without him. That single fact changed everything. Almost immediately, the obvious question became impossible to avoid. Why? According to statements later shared by the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, the explanation investigators initially received was straightforward. Nolan had decided to remain on Horn Island. The account suggested he wanted to stay behind because he was talking with a young woman and intended to catch a ride back with another group later in the day. On its surface, that explanation sounded plausible. Holiday weekends often bring dozens of boats to Horn Island. People know one another. Groups mix together. Someone deciding to leave with another boat isn't impossible. But as Nolan's family would later point out, plausibility isn't the same thing as certainty. And certainty matters when someone never makes it home. His parents have consistently described Nolan as someone who had been taught from an early age to stay with the people he arrived with. His father later explained that lesson publicly. If you come together, you leave together. It wasn't simply family advice. It was a rule. One repeated often enough that everyone who knew Nolan understood it. That is one reason his parents struggled to accept the first explanation they received. Not because they believed teenagers never make unexpected decisions, but because they believed that particular decision didn't sound like the son they knew. As evening approached, concern began replacing expectation. At first, there may have been hope that Nolan had simply found another ride. Perhaps his phone battery had died. Perhaps he was still on the water. Perhaps there was a simple explanation waiting just beyond the next phone call. Families often cling to those possibilities during the first hours after someone unexpectedly disappears, because the alternative is almost impossible to consider. Hours passed. Calls were made. Messages were sent. Still nothing. By late that night, Nolan had not returned home. His family knew something wasn't right. Public reporting later established that Nolan was reported missing during the night of July 4. What happened during those earliest hours has since become one of the most closely examined parts of the timeline. Not because anyone disputes that calls were made, but because questions remain about exactly how events unfolded after authorities were notified. Those questions continue to be discussed publicly today. According to reporting, a call involving the Coast Guard occurred before a formal search was launched. Exactly what information was shared during that communication has not been publicly detailed in full. Officials have indicated the call did not initially require Coast Guard assistance. Later, Nolan's family contacted local authorities after realizing he had not returned. The next day, search efforts expanded. Boats returned to the water. Law enforcement coordinated with other agencies. Volunteers watched the shoreline. Friends and family searched desperately for any sign that Nolan might still be alive. Every hour carried new hope and new fear. Anyone who has waited for news about a missing loved one understands how time changes during moments like these. Minutes feel endless. Every ringing phone creates anticipation. Every unfamiliar vehicle sparks hope. Every update feels as though it could change everything. For Nolan's parents, those hours became an emotional blur. One moment they were believing someone would find him. The next, they were preparing themselves for possibilities no parent ever wants to imagine. Meanwhile, investigators worked to reconstruct the previous day. Who saw Nolan last? Who spoke with him? What happened before everyone began leaving the island? Those questions should have produced clear answers. Instead, some of the answers seemed to point in different directions. One of the earliest inconsistencies involved the conversation between Nolan and the young woman he reportedly met that afternoon. Public statements from investigators indicated Nolan's friends believed he chose to stay because he wanted to remain with her. However, later statements from the family's attorney described something different. According to those comments, the young woman reportedly recalled Nolan saying he intended to head back toward the boat, not stay behind. If accurate, those are two very different conversations. One suggests Nolan voluntarily separated from his friends. The other suggests he expected to leave with them. Neither statement alone proves what happened. Memories can differ. People sometimes misunderstand conversations. Stress affects recollection. Investigators routinely encounter conflicting witness accounts. But when the conflicting accounts concern the very last known moments before someone disappears, every word matters. Because if Nolan believed he was returning to the boat, how did he become separated? And if he truly intended to remain behind, why would another witness remember the conversation differently? Those questions remain central to the case. Adding another layer to the mystery, the young woman's mother later publicly confirmed her daughter had spoken with Nolan that day. She also indicated her daughter had stayed in communication with Nolan's family and had no knowledge of what happened after the two went separate ways. That statement became significant for one simple reason. It did not publicly reinforce the original explanation that Nolan intentionally chose to stay behind. Instead, it highlighted something investigators continue to face in many complex cases. The final confirmed interaction is not always the final meaningful event. Sometimes the most important moments happen after witnesses believe the story has already ended. And somewhere between that final conversation and Nolan being found days later, something happened, something investigators continue working to understand. If you've been following carefully, you've probably noticed that this story isn't built around one dramatic piece of evidence. It's built around a series of unanswered questions. Each one may seem small on its own. Together, they form the reason this case continues drawing national attention. And as the investigation progressed, another issue began raising even more questions. It involved Nolan's phone.